Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. I was 17 when my aunt asked me to watch her daughter for one night. It didn't seem like a big deal. Her house was on the outskirts of town, past the high school and down a long road with almost no street lights. She and my uncle were going to a wedding in another county, and their daughter Lily, who was 10, didn't want to stay with strangers. They thought that if I was there, everything would be easier. When I arrived around 5, Lily's friend Madison was already at the house for a sleepover. The plan was simple: pizza, a movie, and a sleep by 10 o'clock sharp. I had spent the night in that house before. It was quiet, maybe too quiet, especially compared to the apartment where I lived with my mother. But I liked that change of atmosphere, or at least I thought I did. The house was a single story, with a wide front porch and a backyard that bordered a wooded area. It wasn't a dense forest, but it was enough that you couldn't see the neighboring houses when the trees had leaves. I remember noticing how dark that place became when the sun disappeared behind the tree line. No street lamps, no motion sensor lights, just a darkness that stretched out to who knows where. Around 9:30, the girls were brushing their teeth while I tidied up the living room. They had left popcorn crumbs all over the carpet, and I wanted to clean it before putting on the next movie. Then the landline rang. No one usually used it, and I almost didn't answer. But that ring, so old and shrill, made me walk toward it almost by instinct. I picked it up and answered. At first, there was nothing. Not static, not breathing, just a silence so pure that I pressed the receiver closer to my ear. Thinking the call had dropped, I said hello a couple of times, and just as I was about to hang up, a man's voice came through. It was calm, measured. "You look bored," he said. I froze. I didn't respond. I held the receiver like I'd misunderstood. Then he added, "That red shirt, right? A little big for you. You keep pulling up the sleeves." I looked down at my shirt without thinking. I had done it several times, and because the fabric was a bit stretched. "And you're still standing right at the edge of the carpet, one foot on it, the other off," he continued. I felt my stomach tighten with a sudden cold. I hadn't realized I was standing that way, but he was right. I walked to the front window without answering, suddenly aware of every shadow on the porch. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to sound annoyed instead of scared. The voice didn't answer that. It only added, with the same calm tone, "There's a plastic rake leaning against the stump in the backyard. Looks like it's been there a long time." My legs went stiff. That rake had been there all summer. It was broken, which was why they never used it. And unless someone had walked behind the house, or was out there at that moment, no one could know that. I yanked the curtain open and told the girls to go to Lily's room. I didn't even give them a clear reason. I think I muttered something about finishing the movie in there. I heard them protest from the hallway, but by then I was already grabbing my cell phone. I still had the landline receiver in my hand, even though the line had gone dead. I only heard a click. He had hung up. I locked the front door and then checked the back, sliding the bolt and lowering the blinds on the large window that faced the garden. My whole body was vibrating with tension, but I didn't want the girls to notice I was scared. At first, I thought about texting my mother, but then I changed my mind and dialed 911 directly. I tried to keep my voice steady while explaining what had happened, though my hand was shaking so badly I had to switch the phone from one side to the other several times. The operator sounded calm, asked the routine questions, and told me a patrol car was already in the area and would stop by the house. I didn't mention that. For the past few seconds, I had started to hear footsteps on the gravel in the back. They were soft, intermittent steps, like someone walking slowly, stopping on purpose, just long enough to make me doubt whether it was real. The knock on the door came 7 minutes later, but too soon. I knew it before I looked through the peephole. The operator had said the officers would identify themselves when they arrived, and whoever was there didn't. 3 short knocks, then silence, not a word. I held my breath and backed away slowly. There were no more sounds, just those 3 knocks, and then nothing. I took my cell phone and texted the operator saying someone had knocked but hadn't identified themselves. She replied that the officer was still on the way. I stood in the hallway, not knowing whether I should grab the girls and hide or stay still, waiting for everything to pass. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. And in my mind, a single thought kept repeating, what if he's already inside? Lily's room had a small closet and a window that faced the side of the house. I told them we were going to play a game. We had to be completely silent for 10 minutes. No talking, no laughing, no moving too much. Lily looked at me, confused, but Madison, who was a year older, understood right away. Her expression changed. She suddenly turned serious. I closed the curtains and sat on the floor with them. I didn't tell them about the call or the knock at the door. I simply took their hands and waited, ears strained, trying to hear anything beyond the closed door. For a while, the only sound was the air conditioner turning on. Then a soft scraping sound came against the outside wall. It wasn't loud or fast, more like someone slowly dragging a finger along the siding of the house. I stayed perfectly still, staring toward the window. My heart stopped. The sound didn't happen again. A few minutes later, the cell phone vibrated. The officer had arrived. I gathered my courage and went out to meet him, even though every part of my body was telling me not to open that door again. He showed his badge through the glass, and even so I made him wait while I called the number the operator had given me to confirm that it really was him. It was. He introduced himself as Officer Langley, a man in his mid-40s, calm but very alert. He checked the entire property with his flashlight. He even went a little way into the trees. He found fresh boot prints in the soil, just beyond the edge of the yard. They weren't from that same day. They were deep, recent, like someone had been there for a while, watching. The officer reported it over the radio, but he couldn't do much else. There were no signs of forced entry, nothing stolen, no trace of the intruder. Just me, 2 frightened girls, and a phone call that never should have known what it knew. Story 2. It was early June, just after the school year ended, and I was spending the weekend at my friend Tyler's house in the suburbs of Richmond, Virginia. He lived in one of those neighborhoods with cul-de-sac streets, where all the houses look like variations of the same model. The most exciting thing that usually happened in a day was a delivery truck taking the wrong turn. Tyler's parents had gone out of town for a wedding, so it was just the 4 of us. Tyler, James, Noah, and me camped out in his living room with sodas, junk food, and a stack of horror movies that we weren't really even watching. We were around 16, that strange age where you think you're invincible, but you still have that feeling that if you say Bloody Mary 3 times in front of a mirror, something might happen. Tyler's house had a huge sliding glass door that faced the backyard, and right above the porch there was a motion sensor light that turned on whenever an animal moved through the bushes. So when it switched on the first time, no one thought much of it. We barely noticed. Someone made a joke about raccoons, and we kept arguing about whether James had cheated at Monopoly. But then it turned on again, and again, every few minutes. I remember that after the third or fourth flash, I started to feel an uncomfortable tingling in my stomach, like the light wasn't being triggered because something passed in front of it, but because something was there, still just out of our view. We tried to ignore it, but the fourth or fifth time it lit up. Tyler stood up, annoyed, and went to look through the glass. He stood there for a moment watching the yard, squinting. "There's no one," he said, though his tone dropped suddenly, and that made me get up too. I joined him at the window. The yard looked empty. Just grass, a shed in the corner, and a wooden fence marking the property line. Empty, too empty, as if the light had caught the yard holding its breath. The only thing moving was the swing hanging from a branch. It was rocking slowly, lazily, as if someone had pushed it just seconds earlier. James and Noah came over to see what we were watching. We stood there, the four of us, in silence, in the middle of a summer sleepover, not sure whether we were really alone. And then we saw it. A tall figure, human-shaped, but too thin, slip behind the shed. It was so fast I barely registered it before I heard Tyler gasp. "Did you see it?" he asked, eyes wide. No one answered. For an instant, we all seemed connected by the same wordless idea, and we backed away at the same time. We turned off the lights inside, as if that could make us invisible. Tyler grabbed the remote and lowered the TV volume, and suddenly the atmosphere in the room changed completely. Every creak of the house grew louder. Every second stretched too long. We huddled near the kitchen counter, whispering to each other. Did we call the police? Was it a prank? James, while trying to look brave, said maybe it was neighborhood kids messing with us. But no one laughed. We all knew the kids in the area, and none of them would dare sneak into someone else's yard in the dark just to scare a bunch of teenagers. Then we heard metal, a faint, precise sound that froze us in place. It was the patio door handle turning. They weren't forcing it. It wasn't some clumsy attempt. It was being turned slowly, carefully, like someone who already knew exactly how to do it. Tyler's face went pale. His mouth opened, trying to scream, but no sound came out. Noah, on pure reflex, went for the knife drawer, but his hands were shaking so badly that the first one slipped and hit the floor with a loud clang. We dropped down instantly. I remember the cold tile under my knees as I crouched there, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it wanted to burst out of my chest. We waited. Nothing. Just silence. And the electric hum of the refrigerator. Tyler crawled to the curtain and peeked out with just one eye. I saw his shoulders tense. "Footprints," he whispered. "There are footprints in the dirt, right next to the door." The sensor light had turned on again, and when we all crept closer to look, we saw them. They weren't boot prints or sneaker prints. They were bare feet, long, thin, with strange arches, almost deformed. The prints crossed from the side of the house, tracked across the yard, and ended right in front of the sliding door. That was enough. Tyler grabbed the phone and called the police without hesitation. He tried to sound calm while the rest of us couldn't take our eyes off the yard. The operator told us to stay inside and lock everything, which we had already done. The officers arrived about 15 minutes later, 2 of them, with flashlights. One stayed in front and the other went around the house to the backyard. They checked behind the shed, examined the fence, the grass, every corner. Nothing. No broken fence, no sign of forced entry. but one of the officers called us over to show us the marks. The footprints were fresh, clear. He crouched down, touched the soil, and then looked at us with a frown. He said something I'll never forget. "There's no trail out. Whoever made them never left." After the police left, none of us could sleep. They said they'd patrol the neighborhood a couple more times, but that didn't help much. Tyler checked every lock in the house, doors, windows, even the garage. We moved the couch in front of the glass door and left the kitchen light on. No one said it out loud, but we all slept there together, backs against the wall, eyes fixed on the entrance. The TV stayed on low, more to distract us than to keep us company. Around 3 in the morning, I swear I heard the click of the outside light turning on again, but I didn't dare get up to look. When morning came, the relief was minimal. Tyler's mom called to see how everything was going, and he lied without blinking. He told her everything was fine. None of us wanted to explain what had happened, not because we thought she wouldn't believe us, but because we didn't even know how to explain it. An intruder? A barefoot lunatic? A shared hallucination? James took photos of the footprints before the wind or sun erased them. When we looked at them later, they seemed even stranger. Too long and too narrow, the toes spaced in an unnatural way. They didn't look like human feet. They looked intentional, like they'd been sculpted. In the days that followed, we said nothing. We didn't talk about it at school. We didn't post it online. And of course, no one went back into the yard at night. But the strangest part came afterward. 2 nights later, Tyler texted me a single word. Again. The light had turned on. This time he was home alone. He said he didn't see anyone, just the swing, moving the same way it had that first night, as if someone had pushed it. The police came back, checked everything, and again they found nothing. No new footprints. But the feeling of being watched never went away. Tyler started sleeping in the upstairs guest room, the one farthest from the yard, and he never left the blinds open after dark again. Years have passed since then, and we still don't have an explanation. Tyler's family ended up selling the house. They moved to a different neighborhood, one with no yard, no motion lights, no shed. I've talked with James and Noah a few times about it, and we all remember it the same way. Every detail, the movement behind the shed, the sound of the handle, the footprints that stopped right at the door. I know how it sounds, but it really happened. And sometimes, when I visit my parents and drive past that cul-de-sac, I swear I can still feel it, that tension hanging in the air, as if the yard is still holding its breath, waiting for someone to turn off the lights and look outside. Story 3. I spent most of that summer at my cousin Ethan's house in Springfield, Illinois. It was one of those strange summers where you're already too old for camps, but still too young to have a real job. Our parents thought it would be safer if we spent time together while there were no classes. Ethan's house was in a quiet neighborhood, the kind with uneven sidewalks and porch lights that flicker like dying fireflies. His parents usually worked late on weekdays, so at night the place was practically ours. That Friday we decided to do a movie marathon, and around 8 at night we walked to the nearby pharmacy to buy something to eat. I chose sour candy. He chose barbecue-flavored chips. The walk wasn't anything special, just 2 guys walking on cracked pavement, talking about dumb horror movies and arguing about who would survive the longest in a zombie apocalypse. The pharmacy was only about 5 blocks away. It had that typical fluorescent hum in the ceiling, shelves packed with generic brand cereal, and a refrigerator that made a sharp metallic noise every time it kicked on. I remember it because it startled me mid-sentence. While we were in the candy aisle, I noticed a man at the register. He was probably in his 30s or 40s, wearing a denim jacket, worn work boots, and one of those stiff trucker caps they sell at gas stations. He had a pack of cigarettes in one hand, a soda tucked under his arm, and a small blue box of gum that he kept spinning between his fingers while he waited to pay. He didn't look at us, at least not at first, but when we got in line behind him, I caught a glimpse of him reflected in the scratched plastic of the lottery display next to the counter. His eyes stayed still, but his head tilted slightly, as if he were listening to our conversation. I didn't say anything then. It didn't feel like something important yet. He paid, left, and we made a couple jokes about how he looked like the villain in one of those cheap TV cop movies. We paid for our stuff and started walking back, laughing. It was when we turned onto Ethan Street that I realized someone was walking half a block behind us. I wouldn't have paid attention if it weren't for how strange his pace was. He wasn't walking fast or slow. He was just keeping the same pace we were. I mentioned it to Ethan without trying to sound paranoid. We did the usual, glanced back casually, pretending to stretch or tie our shoes. And yes, it was him, the man from the pharmacy. Same jacket, same cap, now with his hands in his pockets. We decided to take a detour, walking 2 extra blocks and stopping in front of an old car to pretend we were admiring it. When we finally cut across the side yard and got into the house, I peeked through the blinds. The street was empty. We didn't tell Ethan's parents. They would be back around midnight, and we didn't want them to think we'd been doing something we weren't supposed to. Besides, maybe the guy just lived around there or was on his way home. Springfield isn't a huge city, and weird coincidences happen. Still, an uneasy feeling hung between us the rest of the night. We tried to ignore it with movies and sugar. We were 3 bags of chips in and halfway through a movie when the knocking started. It wasn't loud, just a soft tap, 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 like fingers drumming on a table. We froze. I paused the movie, thinking the sound had come from it. But it happened again. 3 taps. Not on the front door, but on the side one, the one that led to the small porch hardly anyone used. That porch light was broken, and Ethan's parents usually kept a rake and an old trash bin out there. We looked at each other without saying a word and turned the TV volume down until it was silent. The tapping stopped. Absolute silence. Ethan grabbed the baseball bat he kept next to his desk, and I grabbed my phone, pretending I'd have the courage to call someone if I needed to. We stayed like that for about 15 minutes, listening to every creak or movement in the house. Finally, we worked up enough courage to look through the small kitchen window. Nothing. No one. Just the faint orange glow of the streetlight and some leaves scattered on the steps. We didn't see anyone outside, but we didn't sleep much that night either. Every time the house creaked or a branch brushed the wall, my heart jumped into my throat. The next morning, we waited until the sun was fully up before going outside. Ethan went out first. I followed, still in socks. The porch was empty, just like the night before. But on the top step, there were 2 things that hadn't been there before: a crumpled blue gum wrapper and a cigarette butt. I picked them up without thinking. The wrapper was shiny, identical to the one that man had been fiddling with in the store. The cigarette butt had a red stripe near the filter, a brand I didn't recognize, but it was the same one I'd seen sticking out of his jacket pocket at the register. I remember the way Ethan stared at the wrapper in my hand, like it was radioactive. We didn't say anything for a long time. We just stood there on that porch while the wind pushed a few leaves down the driveway. We couldn't prove it was him, but we both knew. That gum wasn't common. It was one of those weird brands that come wrapped in foil paper and have a citrus aftertaste. And the cigarette butt. Ethan's parents didn't smoke, and neither did the neighbors. That side porch was hidden from the street. Whoever left those things there knew exactly where we were that night. When his mother woke up, we told her everything. She didn't take it lightly. She made several calls and even reported the incident to the non-emergency police line. A patrol car came by later, but nothing came of it. The officer was polite, though he didn't seem very concerned. It was probably just someone passing through, he said. Maybe he got the wrong house. Seriously, someone who followed us halfway home showed up at the side door in the middle of the night and left the exact same things he'd had in the store. Yeah, sure, a simple mistake. After that, Ethan's parents replaced the porch bulb and put a small motion camera above the side door. We never went back to that pharmacy. The rest of the summer, we bought things at gas stations during the day and didn't go out after sunset. I know it doesn't sound like some huge story with a dramatic ending. There was no break-in, no masked face staring at us through the window. But that's what makes it worse. Whoever that man was, he wasn't trying to scare us in an obvious way. He wanted us to know he had been there, that he could get close without any trouble. And that kind of thing sticks with you. Years have passed since that night. I've changed cities. I have a job, a new life. But sometimes, when I'm walking home after dark and I see someone in a denim jacket and a trucker cap, my whole body tightens. I never told my parents the full story. I don't think Ethan did either. But we both know what happened. Someone followed us that night, and whoever it was, they stayed just a few steps from our door long enough to finish their cigarette and chew a piece of gum. Story 4. I grew up sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with my older sister, Melanie, in a pretty quiet building on the south side of Indianapolis. Our mom worked night shifts at the hospital back then, so weekends were when Melanie and I had the place to ourselves. It was our little ritual: horror movies, microwave popcorn, and way too much soda. That particular weekend, I was 16 and she had just turned 18. I remember it clearly because I had borrowed one of Mom's wine coolers and was trying to pretend it didn't taste like cough syrup. It was late spring, with the windows cracked open to let air through, and every Saturday night you could faintly hear someone practicing saxophone on the floor below. The man in 3B was always around. His name was Dennis. Receding hairline, maybe in his mid-50s, wire-rimmed glasses, and that smile that showed all his teeth. He didn't seem dangerous, just too friendly. He said hello every time we passed him, even if it was the second or third time that day. Once he offered us cookies through the crack of his door, saying he'd baked too many. Melanie took one out of politeness and left it untouched on a napkin for 2 full days before throwing it away. There was something about him that made us keep contact to a minimum. That Saturday, everything was going like usual. We had fuzzy socks on, a horror movie playing silently with subtitles, and the living room lamp turned down to its dimmest setting. Melanie was painting her nails with her feet up on the coffee table, and I was scrolling on my phone, only half watching the screen. Around 11 p.m., we heard the ding of the elevator. At first, we barely registered it. People came and went at all hours. But it rang again and again, always stopping on our floor, pausing, and closing without anyone getting out. After the 4th ding, Melanie muted the movie and tilted her head like she was listening harder. "That's weird," she said. We sat there unwaiting for the next ding. It came, but there were no footsteps, no voices, just the hum of the hallway lights. We tried to brush it off, thinking maybe someone was drunk and couldn't remember what floor they lived on. Still, Melanie slid the deadbolt, just in case. That was when we heard a soft scuffing sound right outside our door. A low drag, like someone sliding cardboard across tile. My throat tightened. We froze. The sound lasted about 4 seconds and then silence. I tiptoed over and looked through the peephole. Nothing. The hallway, empty and still. I opened the door carefully. On the floor was a loose sheet of printer paper. I picked it up and brought it inside. It was a pencil sketch, rough but recognizable. 2 girls sitting on a couch, one with her legs crossed holding a phone, the other painting her nails. It was us, in that exact moment, in real time. Melanie stared at the drawing like it might move if she blinked. I kept flicking my eyes between the paper, the window, the TV, and the couch, trying to figure out any way someone could have seen us from outside. But we were on the 5th floor, and the only living room window faced a concrete wall of the neighboring building. No balconies, no fire escape, just that interior hallway. I think we both realized it at the same time. Whoever drew it had been inside the building, probably right outside our door, watching us long enough to catch every detail, the angle of my head, the nail polish bottle on the table, even the fold in Melanie's sock. She started pacing immediately, muttering that it had to be a prank. Maybe someone saw us earlier and drew it from memory, she said, though her voice didn't sound convinced. She grabbed the landline, yes, we still had one, and called Mom. No answer. Then she tried the building manager's voicemail. I told her to call 911, but she hesitated. "We're not hurt," she whispered, like that mattered. I took the receiver from her and dialed myself. As I gave the address, Melanie went and turned off the living room light, leaving us with only the glow of the TV. "If he's still out there, I don't want him to see us," she said. The police didn't arrive for 20 minutes. In that time, the elevator dinged 2 more times. We didn't move. We didn't speak. We sat on the floor behind the couch with kitchen knives we'd taken from the drawer. I was shaking so hard my teeth were chattering. At one point, Melanie whispered, "Do you think it was him?" She didn't need to say who she meant. Dennis from 3B, the guy who knew we were often alone, who offered us cookies we never ate, who always smiled like he knew something we didn't. When the officers finally arrived, we practically ran to open the door. 2 police officers came in, inspected the hallway and the elevator. They didn't find anyone. No one had called the elevator from the lobby, and the main entrance was still locked. There were no signs of forced entry. They took the drawing, asked if we had enemies or if it could be some boyfriend's prank. We said no, and Melanie kept repeating, "Check 3B, please." They went to knock. Dennis opened after a long pause. I couldn't see inside, but I'll never forget how casually he leaned against the frame, in a robe with a little cup of tea, like we'd only interrupted a cozy evening. The officers spoke with him for a few minutes and came back saying he seemed confused but cooperative. That was it. After they left, we didn't sleep. We sat awake in the hallway between our bedrooms, backs against the wall, lights on, listening for the elevator to ding again. It didn't. Around 6 in the morning, we packed a bag and took the bus to our aunt's house on the other side of the city without even telling Mom first. When we finally got through to her, she thought we were overreacting, until she saw the drawing with her own eyes. That was when she filed a formal complaint with the building management. But they said there wasn't much they could do. No hallway cameras, no evidence of a crime, just a weird sketch and 2 scared teenagers. A few days later, Mom told us Dennis had moved out. No warning. Nothing. He emptied the apartment and left. The landlord said the unit was empty when they checked it, except for a folder on the kitchen counter. Inside were more drawings, pages and pages of different apartments on our floor, all seen from right outside the doors, all with that same shaky pencil line. Most showed empty living rooms, but some had people brushing their teeth, tying their shoes, and watching TV. And one showed Melanie and me asleep on the couch, covered with the blankets we only pulled out on cold nights. That stack never made it to the police. The landlord threw it away. He said it was too disturbing to keep. To this day, I don't fully understand how someone could watch us like that without being caught, or how long he'd been doing it. The apartment door didn't have an outside peephole, and the hallway lights were dim. I guess it wouldn't be hard to stand there, still, waiting, listening. With how the building was constructed, footsteps didn't echo unless you walked fast. He could have stood there for hours without us noticing. And the thought that he drew us exactly as we were, not from memory, not from a photo, but by actually watching us, still turns my stomach. I don't live in Indiana anymore, neither does Melanie. But that night left a mark I can't shake. Every time I stay somewhere new, the first thing I check is the peephole. Then I barricade the door with something heavy, and I never ever sit with my back to it. Not now, especially not now. Story 5. When I was in high school, I used to spend a lot of time at my neighbor Kyle's house. He lived just 2 houses down from mine, and his place had become the default hangout spot for our little group. Kyle, Marcus, and me. His parents were laid back. The basement had a projector, and there was always junk food hidden in the pantry that, although we weren't supposed to find it, we always ended up discovering. It happened on a Saturday night at the beginning of spring. We'd watched 2 horror movies back to back. The Ring and another one I don't even remember, probably because my heart was still recovering from the first one. We were too amped up to sleep, adrenaline and sugar running through us, when someone suggested we go outside for a bit. It was a little after midnight when we opened the side door that led to the driveway. Kyle's house was on one of those quiet suburban streets where nothing ever happens. No sirens, no traffic, just a dog barking far away. The air had that damp, cold edge you get after a light rain, and everything smelled like pine and wet concrete. Across from us, on the other side of the street, under the flicker of a broken street light, we saw a man standing there, motionless, like a store mannequin, with his head slightly tilted downward as if he were reading something invisible on the ground. Marcus laughed and said it was probably Mr. Denner from the corner, the one who always wandered around barefoot with a beer in his hand. But even with the shaky light, I knew it wasn't him. This guy was taller, and his posture, too upright, too still, didn't match old Denner's unsteady shuffle. He was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood up, his hands shoved into the front pocket. His sneakers were completely white, almost glowing under the light, the only thing that made him stand out in the dimness. Kyle shrugged and said maybe he just needed air, like we did. After a minute, he went back inside and locked the door without thinking much of it. We slept in the basement, sprawled out between beanbags and an old worn couch. We must have fallen asleep around 1:30 or so. I remember waking up with a dry mouth, wanting water, but the basement always gave me weird dreams. So at first I didn't move. I lay there, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. And then I noticed a faint glow coming from upstairs, like someone had left a light on, only weaker. It was the kind of light that seeps through the crack under a door. I thought maybe Kyle's mom had come down, or someone had gone to the kitchen. Still, something made me sit up. Maybe it was how quiet the house felt. I couldn't hear the refrigerator hum or the usual creaks of a sleeping house. I went up the stairs silently, more curious than scared. When I reached the kitchen, the first thing I noticed was that the garage light was on. From the sink, you could see a small square window in the garage door, enough to faintly light the tiles. And that's when I saw it, something moving. Not fast, more like a swaying shadow crossing the frosted glass of the garage. I didn't move. I stood there barefoot, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then the movement became clearer. It wasn't someone inside the garage, but outside, walking back and forth along the driveway. His head was turned toward the door, as if he were waiting for it to open. I felt my chest tighten, not with dramatic fear, but with that instinctive bodily reflex when something doesn't make sense. I crouched slightly and looked through the edge of the window beside the back door, the one that faced the driveway directly. It was the same man, the dark hoodie, the white sneakers, only now he was moving slowly, deliberately, from the edge of the garage to the center of the driveway and back again, as if he were tracing something invisible on the ground. His face stayed hidden by the hood, and even though he never looked directly at the house, I had the horrible feeling he knew I was watching him. I backed away from the window and hid in the hallway. I didn't want to wake Kyle's parents. I barely knew them, but I also couldn't go back downstairs and pretend nothing was happening. I went back down on tiptoe and whispered for Marcus and Kyle to get up. At first they mumbled something about dreaming, but when I said, "The guy from earlier is back," that woke them up instantly. The three of us went upstairs in silence, avoiding the floorboards. Kyle checked the front door. Still locked. Marcus went to the side window next to the garage. He didn't need to say anything. His body went rigid, holding his breath, and then he murmured soundlessly, "He's still there." We huddled near the kitchen, whispering about what to do. Kyle wanted to turn on the outside lights to scare him off, but I was terrified it would make things worse. Marcus suggested calling the police, but his phone was downstairs charging, and none of us wanted to cross the dark basement. Kyle said something like, "He's not doing anything illegal. He's just standing there." But that made it worse, because if he wasn't doing anything, why was he there? Who stands in someone's driveway at 4 a.m. without knocking, without talking, without even looking at the house? After what felt like an eternity crouched there, we noticed he had stopped moving. Kyle leaned slightly to look again through the window. "He's gone," he whispered, though he sounded more uncertain than relieved. We waited another minute before checking from different windows to be sure. The driveway was empty. The sidewalk, too. No footprints, no cars, just stillness. We turned on the porch light, then the motion light above the garage. Nothing. It was as if he had evaporated. Still, we didn't sleep. We stayed upstairs in the living room with all the lights on, barely talking. Every outside sound made us jump, branches moving, a distant dog, ice cracking in the refrigerator. When the sun started coming up around 6, Kyle's mom found us half asleep on the couch and wanted to know what happened. We told her about the man in the driveway. She looked worried, but also a little skeptical, like she thought it was the horror movies. She went outside to check, the garage, the street. Nothing. No damage, no footprints, just damp pavement and the usual calm of an ordinary morning. Later, my parents picked me up, and I barely talked about it. It was hard to explain something that technically hadn't happened. No attempt to get in, no crime, just a man who stood too still for too long in the wrong place. Weeks later, Kyle told me his dad finally checked the garage camera footage. Most of it was blurry, but there was one clip, just a few seconds, where you could see a tall hooded figure walking up the driveway, stopping beside the garage, and standing there. Then the light went out. After that, the video restarted on its own. They said it was a technical glitch, that maybe the sensor had malfunctioned, but I don't believe that. I don't think it was random. He didn't want to break in. He wanted us to know he could, if he wanted to. Like he was testing something. Sometimes I still think about it. What would have happened if I hadn't woken up? Or if we'd opened the door, just to scare him? Since that night, I've never slept at someone else's house again. And every time I see a pair of bright white sneakers shining under a streetlight, my heart stops for an instant, like it remembers something before my mind does. Story 6. I still think about that night more than I should. It's been a couple of years, but every time I hear someone tug at a handle or walk too quietly behind me, my whole body freezes. Back then, I was in my sophomore year of high school. I wasn't exactly popular, but I got along with everyone. And somehow I ended up invited to a sleepover at Riley's house. She was one of those girls who drew everyone in without trying, loud, funny, with more confidence than a 16-year-old girl should have. Her house was huge compared to mine, an open-concept kitchen, a finished basement that looked like it came straight out of a teen movie. It was Friday night and there were 6 of us there: Riley, Harper, Kenzie, Madison, Emma, and me. I remember being excited. It felt like I was finally part of something. The night started like any other. Junk food, music, a couple horror movies no one was really watching. We mostly talked, passing a bag of Sour Patch Kids hand to hand and complaining about school. Still, I couldn't stop checking the clock. I didn't know why, but there was something about that house that made me uneasy, like I couldn't fully relax. Maybe it was the dim lighting, even with all the lamps on, or the fact that the backyard backed up to a thick line of trees, with no street lights on that side of the neighborhood. Around midnight, the girls started daring each other with those weird TikTok games, whispering questions into a mirror, walking around blindfolded, stuff like that. That's when the vibe changed for me. It stopped feeling like innocent fun. We were sitting in a circle in the basement when Riley pulled out her dad's old flashlight, one of those big ones that makes a loud click when you turn it on. She turned off all the lights and started a kind of fake seance, using a scented candle she'd lit from a jar. Everyone laughed and pretending to be scared, like it was a game. But my chest tightened. I know it sounds stupid, but I couldn't stop staring toward the stairs, expecting someone to come down. In the small silences between laughter, you could hear the wind outside, and something else, something that sounded like gravel shifting. I asked them to turn the lights back on. Riley rolled her eyes. Kenzie called me Grandma and everyone laughed. I laughed too, but it was fake. That's when I texted my brother, Ethan. He's 6 years older than me, and he used to pick me up from school when Mom worked late. We weren't that close anymore, but I knew he'd come if I asked. I sent him a message saying I didn't feel well, that I'd explain later, and asked if he could come get me. He didn't ask anything. He just replied, "Be there in 15. I didn't want to sit there awkwardly after saying I was leaving, so I told them I needed a little fresh air. Riley laughed. "Okay, Grandma's turning in early." And they all laughed again. I remember standing by the front door, holding my phone like it was a lifeline, hesitating before going out. The air hit my face, colder than I expected and completely silent. I stood under the porch light, looking toward the street, my heart beating fast, like it already knew something was wrong. About 5 minutes passed before I heard it, a soft click, the sound of a gate closing. Riley's house had a low wooden fence on one side that led into the backyard. I looked that way, thinking it might be the wind, but it wasn't. The trees behind the house were completely still. I told myself it was probably a cat or a neighbor letting their dog out, but the sound didn't stop there. It was followed by a dragging step, like someone walking with one shoe on and the other off. I didn't move. I didn't even want to breathe. I gripped the strap of my bag like it could protect me. There was no one around, no cars, no other lit porches, just mine. The sound stopped near the corner of the house, then absolute silence. I stared at the fence, waiting, phone ready in my hand. I thought about going back inside, but I couldn't shake the idea that whatever was out there could now be between the door and me. So I stayed there, still, barely blinking. After what felt like forever, I saw headlights at the end of the street. It was Ethan. I'd never felt that much relief. He pulled up in front of the house, rolled down the window, and looked at me with that big brother expression that says, "You're overreacting," but I came anyway. I ran to the car, got in without a word, and told him to drive. He asked if everything was okay. I only said I'd explain later. When we got home, I didn't give many details. I said the sleepover had gotten weird, that I had a headache. He shrugged and went to bed. I stayed awake, staring at my phone, trying to convince myself I'd overreacted, that it had all been my imagination. But deep down, I knew it hadn't. I knew those footsteps had been real. And deeper than that, I knew I hadn't been the only person out in that yard. I finally fell asleep with the lamp on, the blanket over my head, like I was 8 years old. The next morning, I checked my phone. There were several messages, one from Harper asking if I was okay, another from Riley teasing me. "You are officially the weirdest person I know." But the last one was from Emma. "Did you see the cops on the street?" That jolted me awake. I replied immediately, and she told me there were 3 patrol cars parked a few houses down from Riley's. Her mom had heard someone tried to break into a house 3 doors away. A woman had called 911 around 2 a.m. because she heard her back door handle move, like someone was trying to force it open. It was exactly the time I'd been standing on the porch when I heard the gate and the footsteps. My stomach dropped. Everything clicked into place all at once, in the worst possible way. That woman must have lived in one of the houses I could see from where I was standing, which meant whoever tried to get in walked right past me. Or worse, maybe he was watching me from the dark. I couldn't stop thinking about those dragging footsteps. They weren't rushed or nervous. They sounded slow, deliberate, like that person didn't care if they were heard, like he'd already chosen a house. And for a few minutes, that house could have been mine. If Ethan had arrived 5 minutes later, if I'd waited on the sidewalk instead of staying under the porch light, maybe everything would have ended differently. Later that day, I tried asking Mom if anything had happened in the neighborhood. She looked up from her coffee and said, "Oh, you mean the attempted break-in in Crestview? Yeah, I saw it in the neighborhood Facebook group. So scary." Apparently, the woman who called the police had a Ring camera, and the video showed a tall man walking slowly through her yard, straight toward the back door, his face covered. No flashlight, no hurry. He left before the officers arrived. No one got a good look at him. It all happened in under a minute. The police thought he might have been testing doors. looking for one that was unlocked. Nothing was stolen. They never caught him. All that was left was the footage of a shadowy figure moving calmly, like he had all the time in the world. I didn't tell anyone else what I heard that night, not even Ethan. I was afraid they'd think I was exaggerating, or that I'd gotten scared because of ghost stories. But I know what I heard, and I know what the air felt like, the cold, how intentional those footsteps were. I wasn't a nervous kid making things up. Someone was out there that night, walking along the fence, and it wasn't a coincidence. I felt like I'd interrupted something, like whoever was out there hadn't expected to find anyone under that porch light, looking straight into the dark. Sometimes I wonder if that porch light saved me. Ever since then, I've gotten into the habit of double-checking the locks, doors, windows, everything. And I don't go out alone at night unless it's absolutely necessary. I stopped going to sleepovers too. I told the girls I just wasn't interested anymore. But the truth is, I couldn't forget the idea that I'd been seconds away from something I'll never fully understand. Maybe I'll never know who that man was or what he really wanted. But sometimes, when I hear something outside late at night, a slow, deliberate sound, I remember the girl who stayed, and the one who left early, and I'm glad I was the second one. Story 7. I stayed the weekend at my friend Tyler's house. His family had just moved into a quiet cul-de-sac in a suburb about 30 minutes from Portland. It was the kind of neighborhood where all the houses looked like they came from the same blueprint. 2-car garages, vinyl siding, trimmed hedges. But Tyler still smelled like cardboard and fresh paint. His parents were out of town and, in theory, we were supposed to work on a science project. Though in practice, we just played Call of Duty, ate microwave burritos, and killed time with stupid YouTube videos. It was mid-November, right before Thanksgiving break, and the nights were already cold, with that white frost that covered everything at dawn. Tyler's room faced the street, and from his window I could see the house next door. From the start, it felt weird to me. The lawn hadn't been cut in months. The blinds on every window were pulled tightly shut, and the mailbox was overflowing, like no one had touched it in weeks. At dinner, I asked Tyler who lived there. He shrugged. He said his dad mentioned the house was owned by the bank or something, that no one had lived there since the last family moved out a year earlier. Still, I remember thinking it didn't feel empty. It wasn't anything specific. I just kept catching myself looking at it more than I should have. That night, at around 1 a.m., we were still gaming when Tyler got up to use the bathroom. I paused the match and wandered over to the window, distracted. And then I saw it. In one of the upstairs windows, there was a faint, flickering light. It was like the glow of a candle or a flashlight dying. This weak pulse. I leaned in, squinting to focus. And that's when I saw the figure on the porch. Someone was standing there, perfectly still, facing our direction. They weren't moving, just standing there. The porch light was dead, but with the moonlight on the silhouette, you could tell it wasn't a statue. It was a person, staring straight at Tyler's house. I stepped away from the window immediately and called Tyler over. When he looked, the light in the window was gone and the porch was empty. I told him exactly what I'd seen, and, of course, he laughed. He said I was sleep-deprived or imagining things. Maybe it was squatters moving around or some neighbor being nosy. Still, he didn't go back to the window, and neither did I. We shut the console off soon after and climbed into our sleeping bags on the floor. I lay there listening to every little creak in the house, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But I couldn't get the image out of my head, that figure, still in the cold, staring like it was waiting for something. I barely slept that night, Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that porch again, empty in daylight, silently occupied when night fell. Around 4 a.m., I finally drifted off. We woke up when the sun was just starting to slip through the blinds. Tyler's mom's digital thermostat made a soft click when the heat turned on, and that sound woke us up. We stumbled downstairs for cereal. While Tyler poured milk into a cracked bowl, I walked over to the sliding door that looked out onto the backyard and the wooden fence that separated their yard from the abandoned house. The frost was thick on the grass, covering everything in that white sheen that disappears before noon. And then I saw them. Footprints. 2 sets of footprints. Actually, one smaller, like someone around my size, the other heavier, pressed deeper into the frost, like an adult. They started at the steps of the empty porch and crossed straight through the neighbor's yard, stopping right at the fence. But here's the strange part. There were no footprints on our side of the fence, no sign that anyone had jumped it, just 2 parallel trails that ended abruptly at the barrier. I went cold, holding the curtain with my fingertips, trying to understand it. The marks looked freshly made, not warped or melting, like someone had walked there just before dawn. I called Tyler over, but by the time he came, the frost was already starting to recede and the outlines weren't as sharp. Still, you could see them. He stared for a second, then looked at me, like he was reevaluating whether I'd really made up what I saw the night before. But, true to his style, he covered it up. He said maybe they were animals. Deer tracks, maybe, he offered, his voice thinner than normal. I didn't answer. We both knew they weren't deer. They were human. The smaller ones were almost the same length as my shoes, and the way they ended, right at the fence. There was no logical way to explain it without someone crossing over, but they hadn't. The rest of the morning had a weird silence to it. We barely talked. Tyler was jumpy, flinching every time the heater clicked or the fridge made its usual hum. At noon, I texted my mom saying I didn't feel well and asking if she could pick me up early. She agreed without questions. Before I left, I went upstairs to Tyler's room to grab my charger. I couldn't help looking out the window one last time. The porch was empty. The same neglected yard, the lifeless windows. But as I turned away, I caught a flicker behind one of the blinds. A subtle shift in light, like someone had moved inside. I stayed a few seconds longer than I should have, and then I left without saying anything. That night, back in my own bed, I replayed everything in my head. The light, the figure, the footprints, especially the footprints. I even Googled the address looking for something. A crime, a death, some news. Nothing. Just a listing that said, pending foreclosure. I pulled up Tyler Street on Google Maps and looked at the house on Street View. The image was from months earlier. The lawn still trimmed, the mailbox empty. I zoomed in on the porch, almost expecting to see the same figure there like a glitch. But no, nothing. Just a house with no story, no warnings. At least online. The next time I saw Tyler at school, he told me something that made my stomach turn. His dad had gone out to get the mail the morning after I left and found an envelope in their mailbox with no stamp, only their last name handwritten on the front. Inside was a Polaroid, dark and grainy, but you could make out 2 sleeping bags on a carpet, Tyler's room, from the same angle as the window. The photo had been taken from outside. Someone had been there, watching us while we slept. Tyler's dad thought it was a prank by neighborhood kids, but Tyler wasn't convinced. Neither was I. No one else knew what I'd seen. The next week, they installed motion lights and a camera, but they said they didn't catch anything. A few days later, someone cut the grass next door, emptied the mailbox, and changed the for sale sign. That same weekend, a moving truck arrived. A family moved in. A couple, a small child, and a golden retriever. It was like the house had reset. New people, fresh paint, the porch light on again. I wanted to believe that whoever, or whatever, I saw that night wasn't there anymore. But even now, when I visit Tyler and see kids playing in that yard, I can't help wondering if someone is still watching, just better hidden. I never slept over there again. Tyler understood. We stayed friends, but we don't talk about that night. Sometimes I drive past that cul-de-sac just to see if anything looks off. Nothing ever happens. But there's one thing that stuck with me. Those footprints. The way they ended at the fence, like whoever left them had decided not to cross yet. I don't know if I interrupted something that night, or if I was meant to see it, but I think often about that photo, how close they were. Close enough to take a picture without waking us. Close enough to come in, if they really wanted to.